And ladies and gentlemen, the face that you are seeing is a man who was a critic for, in the United Kingdom, The Observer, the London Times, The Independent, and many other places. He's also a playwright. He is author of the book Theater Criticism. The man actually wrote a book about theater criticism. And you can actually get a paperback copy of this on Amazon. It's only $930.35 for this particular copy, plus $3.95 shipping. So I think that's a little much, asking for the shipping there. He is also the man, as we said, who coined the phrase, the comedy of menace, for the works of Harold Pinter, who was also a close friend. So won't you please welcome our new friend of the neighborhood, all the way from England, 91-year-old Irving Wardle. Welcome to the neighborhood. Can you hear me, Irving? And can we hear you?
Can you hear me? Hello, David. Can you hear me?
I hear you marvelously. And oh, and you do not look like a 91-year-old man. And I know that's an ageist thing to say, but how do you feel?
Tom, we love the library.
At the moment, I feel nervous.
Oh, no, you should not feel nervous in any way. Not with your background, not with your experience, not with, Joyce says, my wife says that she loves the library behind you, of looking just at books again. Do you still sit down and read books, especially during the pandemic?
I read for long hours in bed, where I seem to spend most of my life nowadays.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I get through quite a number of books that way.
Well, what have you read recently?
I read Barn 8 by a Texan lady, which is about an animal rights attempt to free a load of battery chickens. It outlives the human race. It has a happy ending. All the humans die, but the hens live on. That's right. Yeah. Hi. Hello there.
They're very, very happy.
You're into fowls too, David.
No, wait. Is that
Unfirth, she's called.
Debbie. Is that a true story, or is it a fiction book? By the way, I couldn't tell.
Fiction. You know, Debbie Unfirth. She teaches in Texas jails.
Oh, all right. Wow.
Creative writing.
Now, do you also read plays for fun, or do you only read fiction and nonfiction for fun? Do you ever crack open a play just to read?
I don't read plays very much. No, I've got out of the habit. I like reading. Restoration comedies, because I don't enjoy them on the stage very much, because I can never follow the plot. But I love the way the words are put together on the page.
So is that like Sheridan and Wycherley? I never liked the rest. Who are the authors of those things?
Congreve, I like. Way of the World.
Huh. Yeah, I never got into restoration comedy on stage, on the page. I couldn't follow them.
It's practically vanished from the repertory now. I think it's because they don't teach they don't teach comedy performance, prose comedy performance in English drama schools any longer. It's sort of dropped out of sight.
Well, you are sort of in some way responsible for that, for being a proponent of a more in-your-face kitchen sink not experimental, but back in the 50s, I guess it kind of was, of people like John Osborne and Harold Pinter who have taken over those slots sometimes. Sure. So did you recognize when Osborne did like Look Back in Anger and those plays, did you feel something bubbling?
Yes, I was immensely fortunate, because I got a job with no preparation whatever, and it coincided with the greatest period in English stage since the Elizabethans. It was an amazing stroke of luck, which I still feel astonishment that it happened.
And did you have?
Yeah, I mean, Osborne. I got married on the strength of Osborne's look back in anger. I was knocking around with a Canadian girl, and we both fell for this play to such an extent that the marriage did not last very long. But it just speaks for the intoxication of the times that it carried us to the registry office, because we were both so enthusiastic about that piece.
Well, when you were enthusiastic about it, did you have long arguments with fellow critics who were like, oh, this is garbage and they should be doing Shakespeare, well, maybe not Shakespeare instead, but O'Neill or O'Neill equivalents in England back then? Or did you have to defend Osborne against people who didn't like the kitchen sink-ish aspects of his drama?
Not in the circles I moved in. There was a very distinct split between those who were enthusiastic about new wave plays and those who thought that it was conducted by a band of young charlatans who had no right to be on the stage at all. But they were swiftly booted out of sight at the time. There was a kind of rumbling of discontent at Osborne that happened a bit later on. I mean, and I fell out with him after a play called A Bond Honoured, which was an adaptation of a Lope de Vega play, which he wrote during the time that his mentor and greatest friend, George Devine, was in the process of dying from a stroke. And I don't think Osborne gave his full attention to it. So anyway, the result was to general opinion, was not one of his best plays, but of course, he regarded the slightest word of criticism, especially from people who'd defended him in the past, as an act of treachery. So I had a great falling out with Osborne after that. And I think my only claim to immortality is that the British Library staged an exhibition on the history of writing last year, and one of the exhibits was the longest telegram in English history, which was Osborne's telegram to me on the occasion of the notice of a Bond Honoured. It must have cost him about 50 quid, this telegram.
Well, let me ask you though, this also brings up a subject, and being a member of the American Theatre Critics Association and the International Association of Theatre Critics that I have been for many years, every time we get together, especially in the early years that I was with the organization there, one of the things that always comes up, especially not so much for big city theater critics like you, but especially in the smaller cities and smaller towns, is, okay, so you're the critic, you're reviewing the work, you're the objective outsider representing art and maybe representing the interests of the audience. How can you be friends with? How can you talk about having a falling out with John Osborne. You were a friend of Howard Pinter.
I was never personally friends with John Osborne. It was the problem came. The only significant figure I can claim to be friends with really is Pinter, who turned out to be a neighbour. There again, that work was his first work in London. The birthday party was generally dismissed, and I went along with my father, who was a Pirandello. He devoted his last years of his life to Pirandello, and he said this was the most exciting new work he'd seen since first encountering 6 characters in search of an author. I was not writing for the Times then. I was writing for a local newspaper in Lancashire, and anonymously, of course. And so I said, this masterpiece has been grievously mishandled by the metropolitan reviewers, and on the strength of which I had a note from Pinter saying, your notice made a lot of sense. Who are you? So let's meet. So I discovered that he was a neighbour. We met in a pub on the Thames. I had no idea what he looked like or anything, but I mean, there was no mistaking this figure when he first appeared, because he made everybody else look like a blur. He was his eyes had black eyes which flashed, and every gesture he made had a kind of decisiveness about it that you don't find among many people. And if for some reason we sort of hit it off, partly I think because of my Canadian wife, whom I married on the strength of Look Back in Anger,
Yeah.
who amused Harold because she'd studied psychology at McGill University in Montreal, and she had stories to tell about the researches into sensory deprivation by her teacher, Donald Hebb, who was responsible partly for the kind of sensory deprivation techniques picked up by the CIA during their work in Iraq later on. And this amused Harold because, as you remember, a lot of that stuff goes into The Caretaker in his remembrances of the lobotomy operations that he had to go, that the character of Aston had to go through.
And so, the Hot House too has a certain level of that kind of thing. It's been a long time since I saw the Hot House, yeah, I think that also has some level of that kind of. It does,
yes. Yeah. Interestingly, he suppressed the Hot House for about 20 years before he finally allowed it to be performed. I never understood why. It seemed a very good piece to me.
And actually what shocked the heck out of me, remember this was before really the internet exploded and you wanted to look at what anybody looked like. You could just go on in 4 seconds, find out. So, we studied Pinter in school and I read some of his plays and I liked something like others, but it was a shock to me when I went to London and saw the Hot House with him in it.
Yes.
And I thought, oh my God, he's like this very stocky, I didn't even know he was Jewish, but this stocky guy with, as you said, the noticeable eyes, but I never even pictured him from the other plays that he wrote, looking like this normal sort of working classy kind of dude. I thought he'd be this effete, rather gay, waspish sort of fellow. I was like, no.
He was very careful about his costume. I mean, he had the costume of a go-ahead shirt salesman, really. I think, and he had this cultivated authoritarian manner, which came out, I think, most pronounced in the movie. Do you see the movie of Mansfield Park? In which he played Sir Bertram, this heavy Georgian father with interests in slavery in the West Indies. That was a pure Harold part. That was he was an authoritarian figure on stage, but used to barking commands. And
well, how was he as a neighbor?
Sorry.
How was he as a neighbor?
He was very good, extremely good company, but you had to learn the rules. You could never ask him any. You could never ask him any direct questions about what anything meant, as everybody knows that. You could ask him what characters wanted. That was a legitimate question. You could say, what does Lenny want? Or he want to be able to get back to play the piano again. That was okay, but it was a tricky area. And I finally fell foul of him because, as you mentioned, I came up with this dubious phrase, comedy of menace, which applied reasonably accurately to The Birthday Party and The Caretaker, the early plays. And then came along a few years later, came the Homecoming, and it didn't obey the rules of comedy of menace at all. So I was in this situation, this familiar situation of the critic as patron. I felt that I'd sort of rescued Pinter from possible oblivion, because in some ways he was a classic example of the artist type, someone who writes obscure poems that nobody wants to read, and I still think that about his poetry. But I invented this phrase, and then he escaped the cage, and I couldn't reconcile myself to the fact that he wasn't obeying the rules which I had laid down. So we had we had a falling out over that, and we never really. We did met from time to time, and he used to fill me in on funny stories about things that were happening in rehearsals for the homecoming, and not the homecoming, for the No Man's Land and the later.
See, his later plays just leave me absolutely blank.
Well, same here. The thing is, all the wonderfully nuanced, ambiguous writing that he did when he was young, he threw that all away and became a playwright of slogans and direct statements and obvious loves and obvious hatreds in a way which seemed quite foreign to the talent which had interested me in the first place. I don't know about you.
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember the last play, new-ish play that I saw of his. It was the whole big thing was that it was 50 minutes long. So people who were paying to get in were paying about $1.50 a minute to watch essentially a one-act play. And I'm sitting there waiting for something to happen. It was, I think Lindsay Duncan was in it. I don't.
Oh, this is Ashes to Ashes we're talking about.
Probably, yeah. And I was like, okay, you know, I'd rather play with a pile of ashes than watch this play.
He was convinced it was a masterpiece. Yes, his old friend Henry Wolfe put that on. He was allowed to have the North American premiere of that at the University of Saskatoon.
Yeah. And it should have stayed there. Let me tell you.
Why are you letting us do it, Harold? And Harold said, why should London have all the gravy? He said.
Because this gravy had lumps in it. But my question though is, since you were a neighbor and a friend, at a certain point, did you have to back away from reviewing his plays? It sounds like you didn't. And then what do you do? I mean, how do you, that was the thing that we have these conversations about in the theater critic circles of like, you can't be friends with an actor, you can't be friends with a playwright, because then, you know, you can't win if you have to review them. You know? Well,
that is perfectly true. I found it an increasingly embarrassing experience writing about Harold's plays. Even when I admired them very much, as I did in the case of No Man's Land, for instance. But when it came to things like One for the Road or The Party, I was twisted in agonies of embarrassment, because I really didn't like the stuff at all by that time. And
did you have to, when you liked one of his plays, did you have to put somewhere in the review that, by the way, with whom Mr. Pinter, with whom I am a personal friend, and then blah blah blah, blah. Like this sort of, not caveat emptor, what's the word?
An interest.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know, yes, I'm not going to hide the fact that I know this man personally, and that we bent elbows in the pub a bunch of times, and given this, I still really liked his play. You know, did you have to do that?
I didn't do that. No, I did. Somehow that I haven't got an easy answer to that, David. When it comes to money and property, it's automatically you declare an interest. Somehow, when it comes to personal acquaintance, somehow you assume that professional values will override personal ones, even with it. And I must say, there aren't many writers that I've been as close to as I was to him at one time. So that, I mean, I was personally in a state of embarrassment, but I didn't make that embarrassment public. Maybe that was a mistake, probably was.
Well, or now in retrospect, and speaking of retrospect, this is one of the things
I think about jumping on both sides of the fence. And there was, I mean, the big example of that, of course, was the other bloke I spent quite a lot of time with, Charles Marowitz.
Who I actually knew Charles. Yeah. I don't think I ever met him personally, but we corresponded a lot.
Yes.
So he was a character. Tell us about Charles Marowitz.
Well, Charles Marowitz was very much underappreciated in London, I think, partly because his manner was very abrasive. He was a professional antagonist, He made it a point of honor very seldom to say anything kind about anybody, especially when it came to biting the hands that fed him. But when you add it, he was one of the American makers of modern London theatre, both in terms of setting up his own house and digging up new work and building an extremely interesting company and working internationally, and also inventing a kind of drama which didn't exist in this country before he arrived, in the Shakespeare collages, which I thought were a real genuine artistic innovation, particularly as in his case, he was not an original writer in the normal sense of the word, but something very original and vulnerable and gentle came through when he was adapting other people's work, whether it was Shakespeare or Büchner or any of the other people he touched. I thought he was
just explaining for our viewers what a Shakespeare collage is.
The Shakespeare collage is you take a work like Hamlet, which was the first work he got to, first Shakespeare text he got to work in, and you redistribute the text among different characters, so that you might have the ghost's line spoken by Gertrude, or a Hamlet's soliloquy spoken by Laertes instead. And the point is, I think it's based on the idea of Shakespeare transcendence, because in Shakespeare you get at least two levels of communication going on at the same time. There's the communication of the character in the situation, and there's the communication of the poet on top of that, so that when people say, well, you take a speech like forever and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, it's no good saying, well, this is Shakespeare's opinion about human life, because it's Macbeth in this particular situation. Well, it is Macbeth in this situation, and also it is the poet speaking on top of that, so that it is in a sense that you can say that it is a philosophic consideration of human life, even though it's spoken by a limited character in a limited situation. And I think what Charles did with the collages was to release the transcendent side and produce levels of irony which are not immediately visible from the text as written. And you got some very interesting results from that, even when it meant. I mean, the most obvious example of it, the main one that might stand a revival nowadays, was Taming of the Shrew, which he recast as a Jacobean tragedy. I don't know if you saw it. So that instead of being a rather questionable comedy, it becomes a tract against the mistreatment of women, culminating in what the equivalent of a Russian show trial, when she's put on display to confess all the mistakes she's made up to that point by showing her independent will.
Huh. Wow. By the way, I want to say that the folks who are watching this interview are just so impressed with you and are so thrilled and interested in all the stuff that our guest Irving Wardle is saying. Irving, who has, when did you start? When were you first? Because we'll get back to Charles Marowitz, because I want to hear some Marowitz stories. But what are your dad, right, was a critic, because you mentioned he was a Pirandello nut. So what?
My father was he was a professional actor before the First World War.
Wow.
But he couldn't make a living out of it, and so he went into journalism in Lancashire, in the northwest, and founded an amateur theatre called the Bolton Little Theatre. So he was an anti-careerist, my dad. If anything showed any signs of succeeding, he would be out of it in a flash. Anything rather than making money. He was never in any danger of making money as an amateur actor, so he applied it. That was what he spent most of his life doing. And also, when he went through the war, he learned Italian, so he spent his latter years as a translator of Italian plays.
Oh wow! So did he inculcate the love of theater in you,
or did you find it rather independently of your dad?
No, I used to go. I used to go along with him to press nights in Manchester and elsewhere in the north. So I picked it up. I picked it up from him, so that's where I got basic theatrical literacy. And also from the radio was great in the war, source of drama. So that was the beginning of that. But I never saw myself going into the theatre. I wanted to be a piano player.
I did not. So do you have a piano in your? Do you practice every day still? Do you play?
Most days, yeah.
Oh,
but the cycle of events was I went to school, then I went to college for 3 years, then I went and did national service in the army for 2 years.
Between wars, I assume it would have been when? That would have been
after the war. This was after the war.
Right.
And I didn't know what the hell to do with myself after that. So I went to a music college, and I found whatever musical ability I'd had to begin with had disappeared by that time. So I spent 2 years being older than anybody else and being dumb in the army. Then I spent 3 years being older than anybody else, being dumb at music college.
And then you came out and
then I had my godfather ran a newspaper. He was edited a newspaper in the north, and he said, if you don't know what to do with yourself, go and see this friend of mine at the Times. He might throw you the odd scrap. So I went to see this guy at the Times, and he said, okay, go to the Irving Theatre tonight and see J.R. Ackerley's play The Prisoners of War. So I was working in a kitchen by this time, making my living as a kitchen skivvy. So I rang up my boss and said, I won't be coming in to wash up dishes tonight. I'm going to review a play for the Times instead. So I went and did that, and I've been used to feeling stupid for 5 years, older than anybody else, and stupid, incapable. Then I came back after that, sat down, and as soon as I had a pen in my hand, I felt I know what I'm doing.
Now, Irving, do you still have? I was going to ask this just before, because part of what I've been doing the past bunch of months is trying to archive all the stuff that I wrote for newspapers and magazines that some of them are no longer extant, and just making sure they're online and available. Do you have that review? That first one was Prisoners of something. It was that
Prisoners of War. Yes. The thing is, I have no recollection of that play at all, apart from one line where there's an elderly officer held in a German prisoner of war camp, and he says at some point, I don't think I shall ever surprise myself again. And I remember that line because when I got back and started to write this interview, I was surprising myself because I didn't feel stupid any longer. Here's something I can do, I thought.
Can we find that review? Can we find how much of your work can we find without paying $900 for your book on Amazon? How do we? Have you collated and collected? Does a library have your?
I've got old cuttings, yeah.
Well, good. I mean, but are they available to humanity and not just you and?
I think if you wanted to get hold of it, you could probably get a copy from the Times. If you, I think it was sometime in 1955. This was.
Well, then my question is broader then. And so you mentioned before that if you're going to be famous at all, it's because that your legacy is that John Osborne wrote hate mail to you or a hate telegram to you. But what do you feel about your legacy? God willing, you'll be with us another 10, 20 years, but you're 91 years old. What do you hope that you have left behind and that people will see after you're gone?
I don't. The theatre and even that very marginal side of it, which includes theatre critics, I think is a very evanescent phenomenon. I think it disappears into the atmosphere, and you can't really, in very few cases, can you talk about definite influences. And text is one thing. Texts survive, theatre texts, and to some extent, some memory of productions survive, though in a very misleading way, unless they've been recreated imaginatively in a very imaginative manner. But the theatrical past, I think, is a very hazy thing. And a lot of it just evaporates into the atmosphere. Obviously, influences are pervasive, but it's extremely difficult to pin them down, I think. I don't know what you think.
Well, I'm speaking specifically because you are responsible for text. You wrote a couple of plays, but you also written, I'm sure, thousands of theater reviews that are part of the legacy of theater. And, I want to make sure those don't go away. I mean, I guess you can go on microfiche at the Times or something, but like if I Google your name, which I did, looking to read your past work, it's kind of hard we find out a bit about you. I found out that you were doing Zumba a few years ago. That's kind of cool. Are you still doing that?
Doing what?
Zumba. You were in Zumba classes at like
no, my knees have packed in. I'm not doing Zumba.
Oh, well, but it was kind of great to see. It was kind of neat. But that's what I found, as opposed to, your review of this Pinter play, this Tennessee Williams play, this Arthur Miller play. Kind of like to have those readily available, but you don't seem to.
I think they must be available, because when books come out about Tennessee Williams or Osborne, for want of anything better, writers of such books are obliged to go back and have a look at what the notices were. And so notices I've written, and Billington and Michael Coveney and my other colleagues, yes, tend to crop up in these books, because what other evidence is there as a rule? It's not that necessarily that these comments are particularly to be trusted, or even particularly well worth reading, but there's nothing else as a rule.
Well, yeah, that's why it's part of the legacy. But I did mention those two names very specifically, Miller and
the story about this is that when Brecht was approached about this matter, he said, "Do critics matter?" And this is at a time when Ruth Berlow is taking all these pictures of the ensemble rehearsals, and there are people interviewing them all the time, and tape recorders are spinning around. And he says, "Yes," she said, "critics do matter, because the texts are there. Those I don't need critics so far as my texts are concerned, but so far as the production is concerned, critics are the best available record." So he said that in spite of all the documentary evidence that, above all, in his case, was really piling up in quite substantial quantities.
Well,
so that I take some comfort from that.
Well, good. That's really kind of what I was getting at. But I also want to get at, and I mentioned, did you have, again, you weren't friends with them, but did you have like a professional row, as it were, with both Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams at some point? Am I misremembering this? Or, you didn't like plays that they wrote, and they actually tried to contact you directly about that. They took it personally.
No, the only, I never had any contact with Williams. I had quite the reverse contact with Arthur Miller, who was ill in hospital, and somebody sent him a copy of that theatre criticism book that you mentioned, and he came through with a very favourable review, which was published in some American magazine. I can't remember for the moment which.
And there's American, no, it was Theatre Week. Was
it? Yeah.
Publication that no longer exists, but Theatre Week was the thing. Yeah. And
I blinked in disbelief when I saw that.
But again, when something like that happens, the next time you reviewed an Arthur Miller play, did you think, maybe I'll go a little bit easier on him because he said such a nice thing about
Well, I always rather liked it. I know late Arthur Miller was treated in America as late Pinter was treated in England. I think as what a shame he's writing this rubbish nowadays when he used to be quite a good performer. Was I quite like things like Broken Glass and Danger Memory.
Right Down Mount Morgan, I thought was very fun and very underrated.
Yeah.
The comedy that he did about a guy with two wives.
That very last one, yes. It was. What was it called?
Well, the last one. I'm sorry. There was one that Peter Falk did off Broadway called Mr. Peter's Connections. That I just was like,
I don't know that.
That was terrible. Really, really terrible. But most of the others were not. You know, and Broken Glass was good, and critics were just like, yeah. You know. But that's right. You did have that good thing with Arthur Miller. Hey, I didn't mention that when you were writing for the Times, the head guy in theater there was Sir Kenneth Tynan, who's not really known that much, paid attention to in this country. But he was a titan over by you guys.
He was. I think he was quite big when he was on the New Yorker, wasn't he?
Oh, maybe he was big here before my time. But do you have any Kenneth Tynan stories?
Tynan.
You must have dealt with. He was the guy there that you were sending your copy to.
He was my. He was. I was number 2 to him on the Observer.
Yeah.
He never. He was vastly celebrated as a critic, but he never made much money, and he longed to increase his income, and so he was an editor, which of course he had unusual sexual tastes, Ken, and he tried to bring these two things together by putting on early porno reviews.
So he's the Calcutta guy. I forgot about that. Right? He wasn't he part of that.
O Calcutta was one that had a long run, and then he had thoughts of. Doing a second one called
Let My People Come. Was that one? No, there was actually a review called Let My People Come.
I don't remember the title of it. Whatever was it called? I don't recall. No, I can't remember the title. But he invited contributions, and I sent a contribution. I wrote a piece of porno and sent it in to him. He said, "Yeah, we could do this." And then he backed down and said, "Well, actually, we got this brilliant piece by Ionesco, which happens to exploit exactly the same subject as yours. So I'm very sorry." But it was the only time I disliked him, because he was famously cold-hearted, Ken. Someone said when he got his invitation to go to take this job at the New Yorker, it was as though everybody else in the room disappeared and he was in New York already. And someone said, trying to get any human kindness out of Ken Tynan, it was like trying to get milk out of a wasp. But he was very nice to me. But the only time I disliked him was I'm just going to turn this television.
Of course, please. We're talking, by the way, with Irving Wardle, the veteran United Kingdom theater critic, mentored, as we said, by Ken Tynan, who treated him pretty well. Friends with Pinter, and we'll get back to Charles Marowitz just a little bit for some stories about him. I also want to talk about our Romania trip. So still much to talk about with Irving Wardle, who's just turned off his device. And so, so finishing up, but any cool anecdotes, personal ones? Because one of the things that you can tell that nobody else can is directly, because we can find out about Calcutta, we can find out about, Ken Tynan's life as a producer, but, what's a story about Ken Tynan that only you remember?
when I was subbing on the Observer, there was Ken was writing criticism there, and he was also editing a television program called Tempo, which is an arts program, which he had a lot of trouble with, and he used to get very nervously exhausted, and on one occasion, on the occasion I'm speaking of, his copy came in, and it was rubbish. It was incomprehensible rubbish from start to finish. It fit the ending of it. It said, "Next week, Orson Welles will be here, outrageously correct." Never Orson Welles having nothing whatever to do with what the week's shows happened to have been. It was written in a state of dementia, so I had to stand in for him and go and see a performance of O'Neill's Morning Become Electra, which went on for about 4 hours, right. Recollect so far as I could another play which appeared that week, which I'd happened to have seen in a preview, and then come home and write the two things overnight without going to bed. I never had a word of thanks for Ken for that. This is milk, no milk from a wasp situation.
Yeah, although he might think, hey, look, you got a good byline in the Times for a major play. So he's probably thinking
I was delighted, because I never wanted much to write for Tempo magazine or to write porno, but I did covet his slot in the Observer, and I got it that night because there was no alternative.
Right, exactly. Do you remember the review or piece that you've written over your entire career that you are most proud of? Like, is there a review, or was it your book?
Oh, somebody wrote in.
Oh, somebody, hold on, somebody just wrote in what?
Peter Anthesonian said, "So great seeing and hearing both of you 24 years after spending time with you in Cebu."
Did you hear that?
No.
No, my wife was saying that we just got a message on Facebook. One of the people who's watching this right now is Peter Anthonyson. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who was one of our cohort, one of the critics, young critics who joined us. We were part of the cohort in Cebu, in Romania, and we had such a wonderful time there. And he's saying hi. He says, "It's so great seeing and hearing the both of you." And my God, it's like our silver anniversary. It was like 24 years ago. Yeah. So Peter, you remember
Where's
Peter?
he speaking? Where's he speaking from?
Isn't he in Holland? I think he's Dutch. I could be. And there was Vladimir, who was a Czech fella. He was the guy I was shared a room with when we were in Romania.
Who was that lovely boy from Iran?
I don't.
You remember him at Cebu? Yeah. And he said, he presented me with a book. And I thought, God, what kind of theatre do they have? Because I have been to Iran. I went there when Peter Brook's August was happening. But that was inside the Shiraz Festival, which was like a bubble of Western culture airlifted into the desert. But I thought, what kind of native theatre do they have in Iran? And he gave me this very, very lavishly illustrated book, and it was Tennessee Williams and Pinter and Edward Albee, exactly the Western repertory which they had played. It changed my idea. Changed my fundamental ideas about Iran. Saying that the mullahs may be in charge there, but culture remains westernized in a very civilized way.
Yeah, because this was already post the hostages. This was already when Iran was like, and they were still doing. I didn't realize that, because I thought maybe, okay, pre-19, whenever it was, pre-Reagan, sure, they were doing Western stuff during the Belgium. Oh, so Peter's from Belgium. Belgium is where Peter Anthonyson is from. But I don't remember the Iranian fellow at all. And I'm sorry about that. What else do you remember of our Romania trip?
I remember not being able to put my socks on in the morning because I had sciatica and my feet looked 200 miles away.
Oh dear, that's awful. You seem, as I said, in good shape except for your knees now.
Get down to my feet now.
Yeah. All right. Do you remember? I've told before that the one thing I do remember is that there was this big theater that we were in, and they packed it because it was a festival, and that it was so crowded that we were afraid the balcony.
That
Oh,
was,
the Dutch part of Belgium.
Peter's from the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium.
was that the Radu Stanka?
Yes, the Radu Stanka. I assume they buttressed it in the years since we'd been there and made it a little more stable. But I literally thought, okay, we're gonna die. We're gonna die watching this play because and a lot of other people are gonna die too because we're gonna be crushed under them. But what else? I mean, I know you probably traveled so many places, but before we get to some of those places, any other Romania memories? Because I don't remember a lot.
My Romanian, I've been to Romania 3 or 4 times, so I get the different memories mixed up.
Yeah.
I did make one very good friend in Romania who was a director, because it was a great place for directors, wasn't it? For some reason it bred theatre directors like rabbits. And there was Chule and David Espert and Andrei Shaban, and the guy I got fond of called Penchilescu.
I heard the name. I haven't seen.
Radu
We saw Chile when we were there.
He was famous for doing a King Lear, with Lear aged only 40. And I said, why do you do it with such a young actor? He said, to show that he's got plenty to lose. He said.
Oh yeah, and he could have had 3 daughters by that age, and
I think that one went down in theatre history because it went on when there was a Romanian president called Georgiu Dej, whose contribution to history was that he secretly bred up a whole generation of Romanian bureaucrats whom overnight he used to supplant the Soviet trained ones. There was a kind of absolutely bloodless coup, and Romanian nationalists took over where previously they'd had Soviet administrators, and he let the political prisoners out of prison. All happened on the same night. And this coincided with Radu's production of King Lear, which had this line, when they came to this line, none doth offend, none, and all the house lights came up and everyone stood to their feet and clapped, the idea of this act of political liberation which had taken place, and which coincided so perfectly with this event in this Shakespearean revival.
Isn't it amazing when I mean, that happens so incredibly rarely in theater, especially in America, where it really is like a political moment. Apparently that happened once or twice in Hamilton, when a certain line would coincide with something that was going on in America that week. Yeah. And suddenly people would explode in a way that wasn't even, when Manuel Miranda was writing it, he didn't even have that in there. And then suddenly, bam,
Yes, I think that was a real kind of that was Iron Curtain theatre. I'm being in Czechoslovakia, and there was some comedy called Whose Turn Next, and there was some. It had to do with unreliable supply of electricity, and somebody trying to change the plug, and suddenly the house collapsed in delirious amusement. And I was with my friends. I said, "What's the line? What's the line?" She said, "Well, it's just the line: first the leader, and then everybody else." This being some kind of electrical pun on how plugs work in Czechoslovakia. A very feeble pun, but it was enough to set the house on fire.
Yeah, no, that I love. That should happen more, I think.
Yeah.
It does. Speaking about electric, because we have only a few minutes left, unfortunately, with Irving Wardle. But I want to get back to an electric personality we were talking about before, Charles Marowitz.
Yeah.
And him being, as you said, he could be loathsome. And as a matter of fact, I'll say this out right now, the woman who's coming on right after this to play our trivia quiz, she's been a theater critic for many years, Leslie Hobang Blake, and she said she knew Charles Marowitz and he was just a repulsive human being. So do you have any repulsive stories or any surprisingly charming stories, besides inside his work, but as a person?
Well, he he discarded quite a lot of girlfriends in a heartless manner. But that maybe that's not such an individual thing. It's I had a very good, amazingly friendly relationship with Charles. I don't quite know why, because I was a limey. He claimed not to like limeys, and I'm limey through and through and through. But he was prepared to tolerate that. I'm sorry, I can't immediately.
Sure. No, I just thought you might have, again, a personal Marowitz story, the way you had one about having to write the review for.
Ask him if you could say it in Dutch for Peter.
If you can also, whatever anecdote you tell it in Dutch, because our friend Peter's co-watching. But let me spin a whole different thing, because one of the things that you mentioned that might be fun maybe not fun talking about, is where theater goes from here, and theater criticism as well. I mean, what the hell do you expect to be happening in the middle of 2021, let's say?
I have an awful feeling it might be very much like what it is now. I mean, I hope to God I'm wrong, but I can't see any immediate signs of this present situation easing up. I mean, all kinds of people are making plans. Andrew Lloyd Webber, I believe, is planning a Cinderella for April next year. I'll be surprised if it happens. I mean, I mean, from my point of view, I don't view not seeing a Cinderella with any great sense of disappointment. But there doesn't seem to be any concrete reasons for suspecting that the situation is going to get cleared up anytime soon.
Well, that's a happy note. So let's not end on that. Let's also.
Ask them the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, have you enjoyed Zoom theater? Do you watch shows on Zoom, specifically crafted for the Zoom process? Yeah.
Yes. What I have enjoyed, and it's only one show, is Richard Nelson, whom you must know about.
The Apple Family. He's actually been on this program. Yeah.
All these plays set in Rheinsberg. And it went down like a hot dinner for me, because if I've got a theory that obsesses me about drama, is that my great reservation about plays and drama in general is that they tell lies about the human race by simplifying human behavior in order to produce plot lines and conflict. And the idea of theatre on drama without conflict is deeply appealing to me, and Richard Nelson seems to have pioneered an approach to doing that, but through relationships rather than concentrating on plot or character, and thinking that interest comes from watching how relationships develop in given external circumstances, and that ordinary human behavior is worth attention and has value in itself.
Even without rising, falling action, leading to a climax, leading to, our typical million plays written this way.
Yeah.
Because we learned first year when I was taking playwriting at New York University, there's no theater without conflict. And you need maybe one playwright who says, yeah, there's still theater without conflict, because just the interaction of people, momentarily there will be.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I just hope it grows and grows. I mean, he claims Chekhov as his precursor, doesn't he, Nelson? And I think he did a production of Uncle Vanya, and he said that the great problem with Uncle Vanya, from my point of view, this is Nelson speaking as a director, is that it's got 3 soliloquies in it, and I believe in drama being an interaction between people rather than anyone shooting off direct address. So he got around this, and by having a mute spectator sitting on the stage for Andrea or whoever it happened to be to address his soliloquy to, so that the soliloquy was turned into an act of conversation instead. I can't quite imagine whether that. But apparently, the production was I'm told was very well received. But I can't.
But the thing is, I will put in there that when you talk about the Apple, I watched and I enjoyed part of the Apple Family Plays. I just haven't had a chance to watch more of them. Every moment there is still, almost in a Pinteresque way, except without the pauses, microaggression. If you're looking at a relationship and you're looking at that family around the table, you can see the husband feeling a certain way about the wife, feeling a certain way about the sister-in-law.
Sure.
There is conflict.
Yes.
You can't say that there may not be like this rising thing to suddenly an explosion, but it's moment to moment there's microaggression conflict.
Yes, but it's not. You have to expand your definition of conflict, I think, to include that. What it doesn't have is this. What you like find in Irish pubs or in tabloid newspapers, namely. Organizing the events that you're reporting or the people that you're involved with in order to produce a fight, and the fight itself is the spectacle. And I think the lowest form of that is these kind of plays in which rows take the place of plot, people shouting at each other and having and
that's wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that that insight. What an insightful. And that's the thing. We have only a couple of minutes left with Irving Wardle. So my other question then is: are you writing? Have you been writing in the past half a year?
Well, I wrote a novel for the first time in my life. Which I thought, well, I'm going to finish this. I did it when I was sort of 89, so I thought it was a point of honor to get the damn thing written. So I'm shopping it around. I don't know if it's ever going to find a publisher, but it was to quote that line from The Prisons of War. I did surprise myself again when I found I could produce that many words.
Well, have you put it aside for a couple of months and then read it and then said, "Oh, I like this," or I think I should stop my next novel?
No, I haven't. No, so maybe if I look at it next time, I'm going to immediately dump it in the trash can. Who knows?
Well, don't do that. But knock wood, they'll pick it up and publish it. And as I keep sort of pounding again and again, I will hope that you kind of make a bit of an effort, since you're not going to the theater these days, to gather the most important of your works and just make sure that we can access them, and that you don't have to go to the office.
I'm scared of going back in time. Actually, that's my. I think in what time's left, I feel I want to live forwards rather than backwards. So I did two things. I wrote this novel, and I joined a comic improv class, which was immensely enjoyable.
Wow! Was this before COVID, or is this an online improv class?
This is before COVID, yeah. So we had time enough to do one show, and another life slogan, which I shall intend to live by, is "Step with confidence into the void," which really makes sense.
Good for you. I mean, what was I'm not going to put you on the spot to like do material since it's improv. You're doing with other people. But what was your like a shining moment that you had, like a breakthrough moment when you were taking that improv?
Discovering that I could be discovering myself as a prince of the church, turning up to have a haircut.
And that was a character. I was wondering I thought that was another metaphor. No, you were literally a prince.
Yeah.
Wow. Are you going to resume that once this?
This is my hope for 2021, but I fear it may not happen.
So how are you? As you said, you read a lot. You're reading bed a lot. What other hobbies are you trying to do? Do you have people around you? Are you still married? You have kids?
Yes. I'm most of my life is married life. I have eight grandchildren.
As Rabbi Saul Solomon, he's a friend of the show, would say Mazel Tov.
Thanks to him, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Are any of them in the arts?
Yes, one of them works for an outfit called Charcoal Blue. They restore theatres and give advice to. They restore existing theatres like Chichester and the National Theatre Studio, and they also give advice on organisations that are thinking of setting theatres up. So, I mean, if you have a university thing where we're thinking of having a theatre installed, they'll go in there and what exactly do you want to use this for? Do you want it to be an adaptable space, or do you want it to be able to be used with an orchestra pit? Because all too often, university or whatever it is will go direct to an architect who doesn't know much about theatres, and they'll produce something that looks very pretty, but it turns out to be unworkable when the time comes. So my son Alex's outfit are there to act as a kind of safety net. He went to last week. He was in Germany, looking at lighting on a cruise for the seating on a cruise ship.
Sure. Well, who the hell's taking a cruise until 2025, though?
You'd be surprised. There are an immense number of people signing up for the first cruise they can get when the lockdown comes to an end.
I think I would rather swim to Europe at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Dave. If only I could still swim.
Well, it has been absolutely a delight chatting with Irving.
Thank you ever so much, Dave, and I've enjoyed myself a lot.
Oh, good. Okay, I hope that your knees get better. At this point, so that you can walk to the theater when you need to, and that you do more writing, and that you do more thinking and reading and enjoying of the life that we all have left. And it's been just an honor to know you and a pleasure, and wishing you just great health and good things.
Thank you very much, and very, very good to see you again after such a long time. Wow.
I know, 24 years. 24 years. Let's not be strangers. Also, I'm very bad at that. I'm hey, and then I get along great with someone, and then decades go by, and it's like, oh, I wonder if they're still alive. Oh my God, they are. Hi. So let's not be strangers. Okay.
Okay. Bye, David.
Bye now.